Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the HGLRC Petrel120x. This is the 1S and 2S version.
Oh, that hurt.
Comes with 1202.5, 8000 kV motors. And the props are 3018 3-inch 2-blade props. Caddx Ant for our FPV camera. The flight controller is the Zeus 5 all-in-one. It's a 1S and 2S flight controller that has a 5 amp ESC. The VTX down in there is the Zeus Nano. It's a power switchable via smart audio up to 350 milliwatts. Mine is the FR Sky version, so it has an XM Plus in there, but that is not the original, because I broke the original one. Motor post to motor post, it does look like 120 millimeters. The unibody bottom plate is 2 millimeters thick. It weighs just a touch over 57.25 grams. And even though this is the 2S version, I did fly it on this 1S 520 milliamp G&B battery, which brings the weight to just over 72 grams. The first flight we're going to see is on this G&B 450 milliamp 2S battery, which brings the weight up to 85.75 grams. You can get another 20 to 40 seconds of flight time using a 520 milliamp 2S battery, which brings the weight to 86.5 grams. It comes with 2 battery straps. I didn't use either of these. It also comes with 2 of these rubber bands, but I lost one. We do get some extra props and some screws for those props. Little manual for our receiver and a manual for our flight controller. And yes, it does have Wi-Fi, so if you're out in the field and you want to make some changes, you can use the SpeedyBee app or the Betaflight app if it works on your phone. QC card and 2 sheets of stickers. As you can see there, we have a relatively calm day, and again, I am flying on a 450 milliamp battery. You can get some extra fly time with the 525 milliamp battery that I showed in the quick roll. Just by chance, this flight happened to be on a 450 milliamp. I primarily flew it on the 525s, but I did charge some 450s in order to just test it. And over the course of a few days of flying, this particular flight, I think, demonstrates the abilities of the quad pretty well, and it happened to be the battery that this flight is going on. So we've done the 120X in the 4S version, which was a real powerful kind of quad. And this is more, appropriate for maybe smaller spaces or more early on in your flight journey, but it's still quite capable on 2S. And even though this isn't the 1S version, the 1S version does come with higher kV motors, which makes sense. I'm going to show you a flight on 1S just to see. So if you wanted to grow with it to go from 1S to 2S, you can see. Now out of the box, it's not tuned for 1S. I did a quick and dirty tune, and I will share that in the video description down below with the CLI dump, a diff actually. So you'll be able to copy and paste that into Betaflight CLI, and you can then use that PID profile. And you'll see it when we get to the 1S flight. The PID isn't very good, in my opinion. It's just way better than it was without a tune at all. It had large bounce backs, but we'll get to that more. But 2S, you don't always have to have huge power in order to be able to fly and have fun. Again, it's going to depend on your space and what kind of flight you desire. But, when I asked HGLRC to send me the 2S version, they said it was less fun. That may have been a little bit of a translation or communication issue there. But I think it's kind of relative. Fun is always relative. If you're in a big open space, you probably want more horsepower. But if you're in a more confined space or you're just not that comfortable with more power, more thrust, then you might want something like this as well. The price on this is going to range. It looks like it starts at about $120, and then depending upon your receiver, then it goes up from there. Of course, that's the price from the HGLRC website. By the way, the flight that we're going to see on this 450 milliamp battery is 3 minutes and 51 seconds. The 1S flight on a 525 milliamp 1S battery is going to come in at 3 minutes and 53 seconds. On 1S with this KV, it is very much just kind of a cruiser, trainer sort of, flying flat. You're not going to be doing too many aerobatics or maneuvers. It just doesn't have enough KV on the motors. But because the components are capable of it, I thought, why not show it? You can see we're getting a low battery warning. We could tweak that out to where the low battery warning comes on a little later within the Betaflight app, and I typically do that. In this particular case, I didn't. I would probably set it at say 3.45 volts per cell to start giving us the low battery warning, and our land now coming in at 3.4 volts or 3.38 volts per cell. I think that would get us where we want to be as far as the flight time goes and making sure we land at the safe voltage. You know, for me, I like to land disarmed and my battery recovered at 3.5 volts per cell. We're real close. I did show you that initial crash right after kind of announcing the name of the quad, and that crash did break the receiver, so I had to do subsequent flights on my own receiver. Not a big deal, but, you know, it's something to measure. There we go. We've got the end of the flight as we wobble still. As I said, 3 minutes and 31 seconds, and our battery recovered to 3.58 volts per cell, a little bit more than that as we sit here and wait a little longer on the ground. So battery's in real good shape, could have flown a little bit longer. So this is going to be the two worst crashes that I had with the quad, and thankfully the only damage was that receiver, and I think the receiver was probably damaged because HGLRC does not secure the receivers down with some sort of foam tape or anything like that. And as we hit that post, you saw it, RX loss came on the screen real quick, and that was a bad crash. I was really worried that the frame had been broken. But the motors, frame, everything was fine. It was just that receiver that apparently broke. It would power on, it would show signal, but it wasn't getting any signal to the board, so it would just show no receiver within beta flight. So at that point, I knew I had to change out the receiver to a fresh one, which I have done. Of course, getting in there is a little bit of a pain. Also, the battery straps that it comes with, you're probably going to use those battery straps for 2S only because they're going to be a little bit big, I think, for 1S. And getting them in there is going to be a little bit of a challenge. Mine came without the battery straps inside. So those were our two worst crashes, and now we're going to jump right into the 1S flight. That is going to be, as I said, it's going to be very much just kind of a cruiser sort of flight. It's, you know, capable of doing other things. It's just not very powerful. You can see the slow, steady climb to punch out. It's at that point, I wouldn't really call it much of a punch out. Maybe a climb was the most appropriate term I can come up with in the moment. But you can do flips and rolls and some basic maneuvers, you know, training sort of maneuvers or early stages in FPV sort of things. If you wanted to go with 1S. 1S has an advantage in that the batteries are cheaper and your weight comes down a little bit, so any damage you might incur should be a little bit less because you have less inertia with the less battery weight. But we have less carry for certain maneuvers as well, and you're going to find as you get deeper and deeper into the flight that as that voltage in that one single cell battery starts to come down, that you're going to use more and more throttle. You can see in some of these harder 180 turns, I'm already getting to 80 and 90% throttle. Recovery from dives are going to be about the same, so you're going to have to use your right stick to control your pitch in order to recover from some maneuvers rather than just being able to throttle out of things. There just isn't enough voltage to spin the motors as fast as needed when you only have the 8,000 kV motors. Of course, if you're really only interested in 1S, then you should probably purchase the 1S version. And I believe, if I recall correctly, that one comes with 11,600 kV motors. Of course, how it flies on 1S, this isn't a sample of that, so I don't have that to share with you. But because this one does use a board and components that allow us to run 1S, I thought, well, let's go out and try it and give it a shot. I did try it on some 650 milliamp 1S batteries I have, and I really didn't care for that. That started to add a little bit too much weight. It's a little bit surprising that, you know, just an extra, 125 milliamp is going to add that much weight, but you can definitely feel it on the sticks, especially when you're running these lower kV motors. Now we've just reached past the 2-minute mark, and you've seen me do most of the things that I typically do. Of course, doing a power loop with this is going to take a lot more training and kind of timing with the throttle. You know, the slow, steady climb. You don't have a lot of thrust to recover, and you can also see as the breeze comes up, my tune, again, my quick and dirty tune, I think it was 2 PID changes is all I did. We have some bobbles as that wind or that breeze picks up, but it is a lot better. I saw basically on the 2S tune, which is what I originally tried, the when you did a snap, flip, or roll, there was some really large bounce back, and there was some controllability in the fact that it was just too loose to be able to fly it very effectively. So Again, I'll have that CLI dump down in the video description. And if you were to buy the 8000 kV or the 2S version and you wanted to try it yourself on 2S, you can use the PID profile from my diff that I've got linked down in the video description. The 1S and 2S versions do appear to be the same price, but of course you need to shop around. You never know what prices are going to be at different shops. And for that purpose, I'll go ahead and link as many places as I can find this quad available down in the video description. You can choose your favorite vendor or whoever's got the lowest price, best shipping, what have you. We've neared the end of the flight, and again, I do want to mention that this does have a Wi-Fi, which to me in all-in-one boards is kind of a new feature that we haven't seen quite a bit. And I did try it out on my desktop computer, and it did come up with a little Wi-Fi for HGLRC, so you can definitely use that in the field. There's nothing you have to do to activate Wi-Fi. You plug in the battery, and the Wi-Fi becomes active with that. Okay, the flight has now ended, the 1S flight. As I said previously, 3 minutes and 53 seconds, and our battery has recovered again above 3.5 volts per cell, so we're in plenty of good shape there. So to my surprise, HGLRC either makes or has partnered with a company that makes earbuds, and this was a surprise to find in the package. My son, my 16-year-old, uses these things almost all day long, so he was my tester in this case. He said they sounded really good, and the touch functions, whether you're going to the previous song or the next song, or you want to increase volume, things that you do with these earbuds, they all work normally. He said he did find that they kind of stuck out of the ear just a little bit more, but probably the biggest feature about these that he liked, it's something that he enjoys, is the ability to use one earbud at a time. So you could be using one and have the other in the case charging, and then when this one got low, you could put it back into the charging case and use the other one, and it works out just fine. Of course, it's got a nice little LED bar up here for let you know how much charging the base has got on it. So then we've got a little USB port right back here. But I was surprised that HGLRC makes or resells or partners with a company to make headphones, and I did try them out myself some, and they work nicely. I don't really use earbuds. That's why I mainly passed them on to my 16-year-old, because I thought that was most appropriate. He's used a number of sets and actually has burned out a few sets as well. His most recent version are the Skull Candy ones, so that's kind of what he was comparing these to, is the Skull Candies. And they were talking to us there a little bit, so if you heard some noise coming, it was asking us about being connected or not. But if you're interested and you're picking up a quad, you might want to check out these earbuds. I know a lot of people fly and listen to music at the same time. These might work out for you, especially in the case of a long fly day and being able to just use one at a time, so you can hear your surroundings as well as the music. And then when that particular bud battery runs dry, you just pop it in the case, pop the other one out, and you're still set to go for some more music listening time. So I mentioned it in the flight a couple times, but this is the 2S version. The KV on the 1S version is higher. So if you're looking at this from a 1S standpoint, I wouldn't really judge that 1S flight. I would only look at the 1S flight if you're looking at the 2S version and you're just curious about flying it on 1S. I mentioned it also, the battery strap. It's going to be a challenge to get the battery strap through here. I actually tried to thread it through without taking things apart, but I really think the best method is going to be to loosen the canopy and everything else so you can get the board a little bit away from the frame, and that way you can thread it through a little bit easier. I just used the rubber band. Like I said, I had a crash and I lost one of the rubber bands. These rubber bands are about the size, for those that are familiar, that I have been using for the TKS frames. And so they have these little hooks on the side. When we did the Petrel120x, the 4S version, I wondered about these hooks. So they just kind of made a thinner frame for this 2S version. I would suspect this is the same frame for a 1S version. I would only think that the different KV on the motors is the difference between the 1S and 2S version. I didn't mention in the quick roll, but we do have the HGLRC hammer, which is circular polarized, right-hand circular polarized here in the canopy. The canopies have stood up great to all my crashes on both versions. And they did secure the VTX antenna in here with a zip tie, which is a good idea. You know, it's nice and secure. The camera angle can be changed without screwing the unscrewing it, or screwing it in. I kind of left it at its defaults, and you can still change the camera angle. Of course, if you find you have extra jello or anything like that in your FPV view, your goggle view, then screw those down as a first attempt. Also, you know, it doesn't have anything stiff supporting the canopy. It's just got these rubber grommets, and you can see how it can move around a little bit. I didn't find that to be an issue, but if you saw something in the flight video, I might need to screw these down a little bit, because again, I did have this all apart because I had to put a different receiver in here as well. It does come with your receiver antennas mounted just like this. You can see I've got a nick in mine. I had another crash after I put a new receiver in it, and apparently this came up a little bit and my prop caught the edge of that antenna wire, and it actually pulled it out of my heat shrink, so I had to replace that down. I didn't find any problems as far as, you know, I don't fly at range, but within my flight area, I didn't find that caused any problems. Of course, we've got two antennas, so I might only notice if I were flying in a particular area at range and maybe one antenna was being covered by the battery or something like that. I do think we could probably use a little zip tie, as I say this often on most, zip tie this down to an arm, which would probably, well, I definitely will help the durability of making sure that the battery lead doesn't get pulled off the board, because if that happens, that's a terrible repair and a little bit of a chance repair. I do wish the motor wires were shorter. I just don't know why they're so long, because certainly you wouldn't fly this on larger props. So you can see we've got quite a bit of bulk there in our underneath our tape. I do like that tape. That is tape that I use quite often. I typically have my width of my tape that I use. It's just like this. It's usually about half. So zip tie this to an arm. I suppose that if you were to have a problem with the connector, with the extra length of wire, that would allow you to either solder it directly to the back of the connector, which you can see those, it's tiny little solder pads right in there, or give you some extra working length. I just think that's probably weight that we don't necessarily need. It's probably less than a half a gram though. I did notice with my rapid fire module that I needed to switch to legacy mode, or I had sync issues, where, and you may have heard it in the flight, to where my Orca goggles would do that little beep where they would change modes and they would try to sync lock. So that would happen quite a bit. I found it happened a lot less with legacy mode on your rapid fire. So rapid fire is a module for our goggles, if you're not familiar with those. So if you are using rapid fire, you may need to, or you may find you want to switch to legacy mode in order to avoid that sync lock. That can happen. It's not specific to this quad. It just kind of happens all across our hobby. Sometimes you have a combination or an environment variable that the rapid fire just doesn't sync lock all the time, or it sync locks halfway through the flight, you know, after it's been sitting there on, you know, whatever your takeoff surface is for several minutes before it actually sync locks. That's not something we oftentimes look forward to. When I did replace the receiver, I did use some foam tape. You might be able to see that little gray slice right under there. I used some thin foam tape to secure this down. I do fault the fact that I broke the original receiver because it was not secured down. It was just pinned down between the camera, the VTX, and the main board. But it could still move around. It does make it a lot easier to bind because you can slide that receiver around to be able to reach the bind button on it. But as far as the long-term durability, I think it needs to be secured down so it's not as likely to have any movement and then that sudden jolt when it does stop. But depending upon your flight space and what kind of flight you're looking for, you might consider the 2S version here or the 1S version, which I've only kind of shown you. And if you are curious about this, its cost and where you can get it, I have links down in the video description. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time, and thank you for watching.